Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 1, Episode 10, A Quality of Mercy. This is the Season 1 finale for A Strange New World, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Strange New Worlds up to Season 1, Episode 10. If you have not seen this episode yet, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So I try to avoid hyperbole on my channel. I tend to try not to make like huge grandiose statements, and I tend to like to think about an episode for a while, let it sink in before I make any such statements. But there's some exceptions. Like when the very first time I saw an episode like Yesterday's Enterprise or The Visitor or Year of Hell, like I instantly knew this was going to be a classic. I instantly knew this was going to be one of my favorite Star Trek episodes of all time, and it still is, and it stuck with me. On the other hand, it took me over a decade before I fully appreciated the inner light. So it doesn't always work that way, but sometimes it does. And so, even though I just saw this episode just a few hours ago, I'm going to say that this is probably one of my favorite Star Trek episodes of all time, of the entire franchise. This will definitely crack, at least the way I'm looking at it now, will crack my top 20 best episodes of the entire franchise. Maybe possibly top 10, but that is something I would have to sit with me. I'd have to have this episode sit with me for a while before I made that determination. But I can tell instantly. I had that same feeling I had when I first saw Year of Hell or Yesterday's Enterprise. This episode was amazing. Absolutely amazing. It blew me away. This is amazing writing. Now here's the thing. I remember when I was a teenager and I was first watching episodes like Yesterday's Enterprise and City on the Edge of Forever and Mirror Mirror and stuff like that, and thinking, well, how come like every time Star Trek does time travel or parallel universe or alternate realities and stuff like that, it's amazing. So why don't they do this more often? They should do it more often, because I love time travel. I love alternate universe stories, and then we got such amazing episodes like Yesterday's Enterprise. So why don't they do it more often? And I've got my answer when Voyager came out. When it had a slew of mediocre, boring, bad episodes that dealt with time travel or alternate realities, and then Enterprise and freaking that just killed time travel. And then even Discovery didn't handle their universe very well. So since then, since I've gone older and wiser, I've learned that just because you slap in something like an alternate reality or alternate universe or alternate timeline doesn't automatically mean it's going to be awesome. Because, in fact, they're really hard to do right, which is why they were so few and far between, because they were saving them for your awesome episodes like Yesterday's Enterprise, whereas Voyager would start doing it willy-nilly, and they just proved how hard it is to do. and this is one of those examples that I feel was done right, was done correctly. Now, one thing, I haven't watched any other reviews or really, I've watched one review, but that's it. But I haven't really gotten anyone's opinion on this episode yet. But one thing I did want to address was I feel like a lot of people are going to bring up nostalgia, because this is an alternate version of the original series episode, the Balance of Terror. And some of the scenes from that episode were recreated shot by shot, and the dialogue was lifted right from the episode. So I have a feeling a lot of people are going to be like, well, this is just nostalgia. It's just fan service. It's just placating the fans. Um, and there's been a lot of that going on in this decade or the past 10 years. A lot of Hollywood studios realize they can make money off of nostalgia. And so there's been a lot of just placating. Ooh, here's these characters, he's from the other movie. And reshowing events and stuff like that. And many of that has very appropriately gotten a lot of slack because it has being lazy and just relying on nostalgia and not actually trying to tell a good story. However, there are several examples where they do both, where they present the nostalgia but also in a new and unique way while telling a really powerful and well constructed story. One example that comes straight to mind is Endgame. People were, making jokes about how they just, traveling back to all the other Marvel movies and showing all the other Marvel movies, and playing off of nostalgia is like, oh, you remember that movie? But the movie itself was amazing because it resolved all these character stories. It was I think it's one of my best movies of all time, honestly. And that is the same feeling I got with this episode. That it definitely was not nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. And here's the main point I want to make. Someone who's never seen the original series, or let's say someone who's never even seen Star Trek before, never seen an episode of Star Trek before, they haven't seen Balance of Terror, they could watch this episode and enjoy it because this episode stands on its own. Because it has a very powerful character story, it has very powerful characters, has a very strong plot, powerful acting. And so you don't need to know anything. You had never seen Balance of Terror in your life. I'm sure you could still love this episode. You could still enjoy it. But it adds that extra layer of nostalgia goodness for those who have seen it, but it's not dependent on it, and that's the difference. That's the difference from your, Hollywood schlock reboot, RoboCop. What other shameless reboot? Jurassic World 3 just came out. Oh, we're bringing back all the other characters, but we have no plot and no character stories at all. Just look at these characters you've seen. A lot of that going around. This is not it. This is a story that stands on its own, but at the same time adds in that extra flavoring for the Star Trek fan. And that's impressive. And I'm gonna say this is absolutely done right, because you have the character story of Pike. And this is a season-long story. And it's funny. I heard someone say, "Thank God this episode was episodic," but it's not. Like, this show isn't really episodic because it has the character stories last the entire season, which is all Star Trek ever should have done. Like, it doesn't have to tell a 10-hour movie. It doesn't have to tell one story over 10 hours like Picard or Discovery does. Which is why I argue a lot of Next Generation is not episodic, because it does have those two character stories, although they didn't do it as much as they should have. Certainly not as much as Strange New Worlds does. And Voyager, one of his major issues is that it wasn't. That the characters reset after every episode, and they didn't have the long-term character storytelling that they should have. Where Strange New Worlds, even though you got each episode was its own story, the character stories lasted the entire season, and so that also makes this episode more powerful, because they built off of what they did in Discovery season 2, with Pike discovering his what's going to happen to him in the future, and made it like a season-long arc for this season that was, I would say, resolved in this episode, pretty much, because they were toying with him. You know, he's being like really depressed and upset over the fact that he knows in less than 10 years that he's gonna become horribly scarred and paralyzed and a vegetable, basically. And he knows he has that future looming over him, and he was toying with the idea of changing it. And he's memorized like the names of all the cadets who he saves in this fire or who die. Like 2 of them die in the fire, and the rest he saves. And he like memorized all their names and like looked them up in present times. And so to see him like confronted with meeting like a young boy who he knows will grow up to die in that fire, and being and saying to himself, like he says at the start of the episode to Una, he says, I have to do something. I can't just do nothing. I can't just let this future happen. Now, in the Discovery episode with the time crystal, the Klingon wizard or whatever you told him that if he decided to take the time crystal, which he did, that he would not be able to change his future. Now, I don't know, that's probably not good enough, because sure, he can still change his future, as we see here. He could just write a letter to the cadet saying, hey, don't go here at this time, you'll die. And we see that it does work, but it's severely, like, changes the future. Oh, another episode this episode reminds me of is Tapestry, another classic Trek episode. And so he can change the future. It would just have dire consequences. And I do like how when the future Pike comes back, he explains like that he had to convince the Klingons to let him, come back and talk to his younger self, because the Klingons just wanted to kill him to stop him from damaging the timeline. And so and he's like, no, but I convinced him that I would be able to convince you not to do it. And it was so cool, by the way, to see Pike in that the movies era uniform. And because when I first saw him, I was like, yeah, but Pike is never going to be alive or around. He's going to be alive, but not around in that time period. But of course, he's come from an alternate timeline where Pike had changed the future simply by writing a letter. And I love the interaction between the older Pike and the younger Pike. Like the way they interact with each other, has like kind of how he kept interrupting him and shit. It's God, Anson Mount's just such a good actor. But then he's like, you have to touch the time crystal and you experience this, so you know why you need to not do it. And then voila, we get a different version of Balance of Terror, where Pike never stepped down and he was still the captain of the Enterprise. Now I got a little canon quibble, because if I recall the original series, this accident Pike got in that made him paralyzed happened after Kirk was already in command of the Enterprise. So it seems like that's not what took him off the Enterprise. It was that he had decided to leave the Enterprise anyway for a completely different reason, and then got paralyzed after the fact. But that's just a little canon quibble. I don't really actually care. But that is quite, I mean, you could always make up any old bullshit excuse, like, oh, well, in this timeline, whatever. But really, it doesn't track, but that's fine. As I said, I don't give a fuck. So, so we see this different version of events, of the same version of A Balance of Terror, but if Pike was still in command, and Kirk was in command of the Farragut. Now, I actually was thinking a lot that I would love to see Strange New Worlds recreate an episode of the original series, or maybe not Strange New Worlds specifically, but maybe just do an updated version of a classic episode where you have better production value, better special effects, and better acting and all that kind of thing, and modernized, adjusted. And that's what they do here, except it's even better because it's not just a shot-for-shot retelling, it's an alternate reality glimpse of alternate timeline, kind of like the Yesterday's Enterprise thing, seeing how things would have went down in a different situation. And I love how Pike immediately decides that he needs to commit to doing what he would do normally, to behaving how he would normally behave, and I like how he confided in Spock, and Spock even said, like, the point's not to change the future, the point is to see how the future ends up going wrong. And so Pike decides then to behave the way he would behave. And so it's interesting because this episode highlights the differences between Kirk and Pike, because in some ways, sometimes I even thought to myself, are these two even that different? But here they show how they are. That Kirk is a bit more gung-ho. Even though his ultimate goal is peace, he is more willing to fire the phasers than Pike is. Particularly how Pike's been betrayed in Discovery and Strange New Worlds. So it's an interesting concept. It's almost like a City on the Edge of Forever kind of deal, where him thinking that peace is the way actually results in a fucked up future. And so I don't think, as some people might say, it's anti-Star Trek because it's saying that peace isn't the way, but that City on the Edge Forever said that over 50 years ago. But saying, yes, peace is the ultimate goal, but every situation calls for a different solution. Sometimes the solution is to destroy the enemy, as Kirk proved, because I've heard Bounds of Terror sort of analyzed, and that the goal, the Romulans, so one person even compared it to the Roman Empire, with obviously Romulan and Roman, and then the Roman Empire would start wars to build their economy. Like, just basically find an excuse to do a war. It wasn't about whatever reason. It was just war was good for their economy, which I'm not even going to get to modern day stuff about that. But anyway, and so the positive was the same sort of thing here, that the Romulans wanted to start a war with the Federation because they needed to expand. They needed to build the resources, to build their economy, and this was the best way to do it. So it's not like the Federation did anything wrong to them, or they're like, oh, I'm sick of these Federation guys just sitting there. No, they're like, for our society, we want to go to war, and the Federation looks like we could go to war with them, but we don't know yet, so they sent the one ship to test them, to see if a war was viable. And in the actual Balance of Terror in the original series, the answer they got back was no, a war would not be viable, because Kirk destroyed the Romulan warboard before it could make it back to Romulan space, which told them that the Federation was not weak, and that maybe they should look for other ways to build their economy. Whereas in here, even though Pike's way of negotiating and saying let's talk it out, let's come to a peaceful resolution, even though you've already killed a bunch of our people, was interpreted by the Romulans as they are weak. So yes, we can definitely build our economy by attacking them. War with them is a good idea because we can kick their asses, which is actually a false reading. Which I do love how the Romulan commander in this episode was smart enough to see that. They're like, this is just going to cause an endless war, but the other Romulans are too arrogant, and we're like, nah, they're fucking weak. We can win. and so by killing the Romulans, by destroying the ship, by killing all the Romulans like Kirk originally did, they actually, in the long run, prevented more deaths. And that's really powerful. And I think the comparisons of Kirk and Pike, and how one outcome could be completely different had it actually been a different commander in the right place at the right time. It's quite, yeah, it's a really powerful thought device, and it also shows that Pike isn't wrong. Like, it's not saying that Kirk is a better captain than Pike. Is basically saying that different situations call for different thought processes. There are different ways of solving different solutions, different ways of solving the problems, and that Pike's way of doing it would work in some circumstances, and maybe in others Kirk's wouldn't work. But in this particular circumstance, Kirk's way definitely would work. And on top of that, there's the added thing of Spock getting completely paralyzed and basically almost trading places with Pike. Whereas if Pike doesn't be a war where millions die, that wasn't supposed to happen and wouldn't happen. And then of course then the solution for him becomes simple. It becomes easy. He realizes that he needs to accept his fate and not fight it. And that was fucking powerful. It was so powerful, especially the way they portrayed it with the older Pike and the future Pike, and then once he decides to change his mind, older Pike disappears. Now, one aspect of this episode I thought maybe was a little bit weak, or they could have done without, was the inclusion of Kirk. It was interesting seeing him in command of the Farragut, but it seems like they were being a bit on the nose and hitting you over the head with, oh, this is the difference between Kirk and Pike, by even having the two argue over how they would handle the situation differently. And it seems like they could have gotten their message across more subtly. If they don't need to have Kirk there to show the difference of Kirk and Pike. But again, I suppose that's for those who have actually already seen Balance of Terror. Maybe it wouldn't work as well for those who hadn't seen Balance of Terror. It wouldn't come across as strongly as this is why this is happening, because there's a difference in style between these two commanders. So maybe that's why you need a Kirk there, in order for those who hadn't seen the original series or Balance of Terror to be like, this is why it's happening. But for me, I feel, as a Star Trek fan who's seen Balance of Terror a billion times, it seems a bit like you're knocking me over the head with a sledgehammer, where I feel like this same message could have been gotten across more subtle. But I don't know. But speaking of seeing A Balance of Terror a billion times, yeah, I definitely recognized the certain lines that were pulled right from the episode, and it was so cool. I'm sorry, it did hit my nostalgia areas right in the right place. Like, it did, like, I don't like to say fan service, because I think fan service is a negative thing. If you use it in a positive way, then you're misusing the term. But I don't know, maybe I'll misuse it and say it was fan service in a positive way, because it's, yeah, seeing the shot-for-shot remakes, but updated for modern, like, especially when that Outpost was being, because that's something that bothered me watching. Even though I love Balance of Terror, I just named it one of my top 3 episodes of the original series. And seeing the but it's cheesy, like when the guy in the Outpost is about to be destroyed, it's like, can you see it in the front? Oh! He's like overacting and melodrama. Where here you get like a more pulled back, modernized version where the special effects are better. You can see the fire raging behind him. You can see the Outpost on the asteroid, and it's so cool. so cool to fucking see it like that. I'm sorry, like definitely geeking out over that. And other like lines of dialogues they pull from it. Oh, they even have the fucking music, just like they did in that earlier episode of Spock Amok. They bring the dun 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 dun. But again, like, if you had never seen the original series, this will not bother you. It's not like shameless fan service. This time I am saying it in a negative way, which a lot of modern stuff does do, to be like, "Ooh, look at this, remember that?" Where this isn't that. It's just the extra flavor, as I'm saying, that adds to an already original and powerful story. And yeah, I just reviewed Obi-Wan Kenobi, the series that just came out, and it was okay. It wasn't terrible, but I do stand by that. I feel like it was 80% dependent on nostalgia. Like, you would have had to have some attachment to Star Wars, to these characters, in order to really get the full enjoyment from that show. And I feel like if you had no knowledge of that, then you wouldn't really like it that much. The only way you really appreciate it is you need to have that prior nostalgia, which you don't need here. It's not a requirement, but it helps. It definitely adds power to it, and really, and that's impressive. Most impressive. It really strengthens the whole thing. Now, having Ortegas fulfill the role of Styles, of being the bigot who's bigot of Spock, is another decision I was a little iffy on. I feel like they should have just brought in Styles for this episode, because they could have just said Ortegas got transferred to another ship just like Lahan did. But it seemed out of place when she started being bigoted towards Spock, especially the way if they've worked with each other even for this long. I don't know. And then you had the wedding, just like it was in Balance of Terror, but in this time it was the woman who died, and whereas in Balance of Terror it was the man who died, which is, I like that sort of interesting flip. And the other thing is Sam Kirk, it was in this episode, but in the actual show he would be dead at this point. Oh no, wait, no, he didn't die yet. That's right, he died at the end of season 1. This episode's at the beginning of season 1, but he wasn't serving on the Enterprise. He was on some colony or bullshit. Maybe, so maybe that's a result of Pike still being in command. But yeah, so the other thing I was going to mention is Spock, like the scene with Spock and Pike at the end when Pike returns to his timeline. Spock kind of sort of like can gleam a little bit of what is happening, that Pike is sort of sacrificing, is like not changing his future, because the future, if he did, the future for Spock would be worse. And I think Spock is getting that, doesn't fully understand, but has this inkling of Pike protecting him. And it was a beautiful scene, and it really, really sets up for, especially when it says, like, you know, I really appreciate you, and Spock says the same. Like, it's really touching, and it really sets up for, and this is something the writer of the episode said, and I totally got this, sets up for the menagerie and why Spock would risk his career to save Pike, to give him a better future. And it really, it's retroactively makes that episode more powerful, because I have heard some people complain that was out of character for Spock to, you know, break all these rules to take Pike to the Talos 4, whereas after seeing this, it doesn't seem so out of character for me anymore. It seems a lot more in line that the bond between these two are so strong that he would risk his career, he would risk everything to save Pike. And again, there's something a lot of people in reviews and stuff don't bring up, is that if from watching the menagerie, you have to remember that Pike actually does live happily ever after. He does have a very pleasant future, which he does not know at this stage. He knows of his future where he gets in a fire and is mangled and becomes a vegetable, but he doesn't know that he will actually get to live a normal life on Talos 4 with the woman he loves, which is reinforced in the Discovery episode where Vina appears, where he still loves her. And so I actually, what I want, maybe some people will disagree with me, but I think that the series finale, whenever that's going to be, but I think the series finale of Strange New Worlds should be a recreation of the menagerie, but told from Pike's perspective, and like go beyond what happened in Menagerie, to show what Pike is like once he lives on Talos with Vina. Because I think it would really... Obviously, I don't want them sitting around watching The Cage. Like they did in the Menagerie. But, so they wouldn't do all of it, just like some of it, like they did here. But then show different perspectives, like do a different take on it. Because I feel like we need that payoff of Pike realizing, after years of this daunting, knowing that this daunting, horrible thing is going to have to happen to him, realizing that it's kind of ironic that he actually is going to have a happy ending and didn't know, and was agonizing over this, not realizing that he would have this happy ending. And plus, I just think it would be cool to see Spock sort of, again, that connection of him sticking up for Pike. It would make a lot more sense in the context of Strange New Worlds. But anyway. Okay, so I do have to talk about the cliffhanger with Una, which that was kind of hinted at because when Pike in this future was inquiring about number one, and they said, and there was like, well, we can't talk to her, she's in prison, or something like that. And so you did get the feeling that she would get put in prison for the, and then Spock brings it up later as well, for the fact that she's an augment, but didn't realize it was going to happen like immediately. And it was actually Pike's girlfriend, which I don't really know about this character, but it was Pike's girlfriend that was the one that had to arrest her. And I love how Pike was like willing to like kick the security guy's ass, but Una was like, no, stop. I always knew this day was coming. And he says, like, I'm going to fight this. Now, it's interesting because number one is a character, we don't know her fate, because we've never seen her past the cage, so we're already past where we have seen her in canon. So, for as far as we know, she could end up in the Federation prison for the rest of her life. So we don't know her fate, so that makes it a lot more exciting as to whether or not Pike is going to be able to rescue her. I hope so. I really hope they don't write her off the show, because I want to see more of this character. And then there's also, La'an is up in the air because she's gone off with Newt to find her home or something. And so they're starting this season with all these different characters in play. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. So it's an effective cliffhanger. I don't mind. So I haven't watched reviews. I don't know if people could bitch about the fact they left it on the cliffhanger. I don't mind. I think I'm excited to see where they take this. One last thing I have to mention is the scene we get where Spock is repairing the transporter, and when he's talking over the comms to someone with the Scottish accent. It's funny because I was watching this with closed captions on, and because the person, whenever they have someone speaking who's like over the speaker where you can't see them on screen, it will have their name in parentheses over top of what they're saying, so you know who's talking. But this time on the closed caption, it didn't say Scotty, it said engineer. I'm like, come on. Engineer, that's fucking Scotty. Which is, I don't know, which maybe it shows they were playing a little coy with it because they never actually specifically said it was Scotty, but come fucking on, an engineer with the heavy Scottish accent. and Scotty was supposed to be the engineer in this time period, or at this stage. Of course, it's Scotty. Oh, last thing also too, I wanted to mention. I love how, so I can't remember when or how exactly, but I did remember at some point in this episode, someone refers to the timeline that happened in the original series that aired as the prime timeline. It's canon now, the prime timeline. That's all that exists, because fuck every other timeline. Anyway, so my rating for Equality of Mercy out of 10 is, of course, a 10, the best. As this is easily my favorite episode of the show, easily my favorite episode of all modern Trek. All the Star Trek that's come out since 2016, since Enterprise got canceled. This is easily the best episode of all of Trek, and it's the probably one of my favorite episodes of the entire franchise. And it's Strange New Worlds overall is one of the best. Is the best season. This season 1 of Strange New Worlds, by far the best season of modern Trek. Easily. Very easy. Anyway, so that's it for my review of Equality of Mercy. Yeah, and I'm so glad that Strange New Worlds ended on a high note. Such a high note, too. So I not finished covering Strange New Worlds. I'll be back next week. Sometime to do a live discussion with my sister. We haven't worked out where or when that's going to be, but sometime next week. And then also I'll do my own full-length review of Season 1 of Strange New Worlds, where I'll give my thoughts on the season as a whole. So check out my channel for that, and I also cover all sorts of other Star Trek videos, as well as other shows such as Star Wars, Rebels, Westworld, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.